everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. My goal here is to help us all connect, inspire, and create. And every week, I invite a speaker to share a bit of inspiration, creativity, and their passion for photography. You can find the schedule for our upcoming presentations on my website at lindanickell.com. Under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to previous sessions on my YouTube channel. So please subscribe, like, and share. Erin Randall is an Agile coach, and you can connect with her at admilyoracoaching.com. But on Wednesday nights, you can usually find her here working the Zoom buttons for me. Say hello, Erin.
Hello, Linda, and I'm so proud of you. You said the name right. I'm like, good job, you.
Like 1 out of what, 10? I get it right. So let's see if we
Lucky
can.
10.
Yeah, well, today's your lucky 10. Yay. My guest tonight is Craig Varjabedian, who is joining us from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Craig is an accomplished artist who has authored several books. His photographs have been exhibited and collected by museums throughout the country. And he also won an Emmy for his work in a documentary film. Craig's list of accomplishments are many, but if you'll take the time to visit his website, craigvarjabedian.com, you'll find stunning images of the American West and the inspiring stories of its native people. Craig's blog offers an opportunity for him to share lessons that he's learned from behind the lens. And you can sign up for his newsletter and take a peek at his photography workshops that will tempt you to visit the land of enchantment for yourself. In tonight's presentation, Into the Great Light, a conversation with photographer Craig Varjabedian. Craig will share his stories behind his stunning photographs of White Sands National Park. This spectacular 275 square miles of gleaming white gypsum dunes located in southern New Mexico is one of the nation's newest national parks. Craig's 5-year photography adventure came together as both an award-winning book and a current national traveling exhibition titled Into the Great Sands. It is with great pleasure to welcome you to the Happiness Hour, Craig.
Oh my goodness. Wow, I hope I can just live up to all those kind words.
Well, I butchered your name and I told you that I would. So
that's okay. No, don't even worry about it. You will not be the last, and you're certainly not the first.
So please say your name so everybody hears it the correct way.
Sure, it's Varjabedian. And my people, are Armenian. They come from the other side of the world. Mm-hmm. I am actually the first of my family born in North America. My daughter being the first born here in the United States. I was born in Canada some years ago. But it's Varjabedian, and it's an Armenian. It's Armenian certainly, and it means teacher.
Oh,
so perfect. I was blessed with, this calling that I was given, by the angels or whomever. Maybe it was the demons. I don't know, but it's certainly a joy because it dovetails so wonderfully into my work as a photographer. Because photography, for me at least, is about sharing stories, sharing beautiful things, and teaching kind of just folds right in with that notion. I was thinking about this morning when I got up and watched the sun come up, and I was thinking that there's a wonderful synergy, I guess, between what it is that you do with the Happiness Hour and what I do as a photographer and author and teacher and all those sorts of things. In that, photography for me probably is, and I have to be careful here because I am married and have children and so on, and I don't want to slight anyone in any way, but for me, photography is probably the happiest, the most joyous thing I have the privilege of being able to do. And I'm married to a lovely woman who has unfailingly, unflinchingly, wonderfully, amazingly, kindly, all of those good words, supported this journey of mine. And I'm ever so grateful particularly when I decided to leave doing commercial work years ago. I made photographs of automobiles years ago. And I decided to leave it because I woke up in, I want to say it was like Cleveland or something, and I couldn't remember where I was because I was in a Holiday Inn that looked like the Holiday Inn I'd stayed in, the night before in some other town like Detroit or something like that. And I realized that I was I was spending my life going through the paces, and I decided that I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to just go through the paces. And so I, retreated in a sense. I decided that I would shut down my practice as a commercial photographer for the most part. There's been some exceptions after that, but I, closed my studio and, sent everybody on their way that worked for me, and decided to sort of find my own way in all of this. And that's been just a tremendous joy. A couple of years after I was a commercial shooter and retired from that, I decided that I would go to graduate school in photography. And I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology, where I got my MFA, my Master of Fine Arts degree in photography. And that process really was a joy in so many different ways, but it brought me to New Mexico, where I came to do my graduate work. I was a student in Rochester. I was not feeling particularly, for the work I wanted to do, I wasn't feeling particularly stimulated. And so I was able to convince my professor to let me come here. And I came here, and I had been here before, and I was praying I could find a way back here someday. And remarkably, life allowed me to do that. And I came here and I photographed, and I got my graduate degree. And amazingly, after 30 plus years, I still live here and I still make pictures here. So that's kind of my little story about coming to New Mexico and how I became a photographer. I think that because I promised to tell you this story real fast, I hope I'm not delaying things here too much.
Nope, not at all.
I promised you when we spoke the other day that I would tell you about this amazing, incredible chance meeting I had with this really well-known photographer from California. My parents moved my family to the United States in 1970 from Canada. And before I left, as soon as I got over here, I decided, with what little money I had saved from my odd job, salary, I decided to buy myself a really good camera. And that, surprisingly, it was amazing because the thing became my best friend as I was trying to sort of matriculate into American society, which Canada was in a different place. It's different. It's I'm not trying to say it's bad. It's not like that, but it's just different. And trying to figure out my way through it was a challenge for me. Gone into town with some people I worked with on the high school newspaper, and I wasn't driving yet, and the other people were, and a fight broke out between the two of them, and I decided, like an idiot, to walk home. And I lived miles and miles and miles away from home. And anyway, I was walking back in the middle of this light snow. I'm trying to paint the picture here. Imagine Jimmy Stewart on the bridge, in It's a Wonderful Life. And anyway, I'm walking by this house, in Birmingham, Michigan. And I look up into the window, and there's this older man who looks a lot like I do now, I think. Working, with hanging pictures, and he looked out and saw me standing there in my little duffel coat and my camera around my neck, and he motioned, for me to come in. So I hiked up the stairs, went inside, and I went in there, and I saw these incredible black and white photographs, on the wall, and there were pictures of waterfalls and desert pictures and magical landscapes, and the storm clearing over what I found out to be later was Yosemite Valley, and I remember this picture of the moon rising, over this little graveyard, moon was going like this, and I just was transfixed, and I remember, wow, just being just overwhelmed. And the guy comes over to me. He says, "So I see you're out taking pictures." And I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "What kind of camera do you have?" And I told him. "What kind of film?" He says, "Do you develop your own film?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Anyway, we got through all the technical stuff, that he decided was a way to open a conversation with me. And we talked for a long time. And he told me that he had made the photographs that were on the wall, which was, for me, was miraculous. And I had one of those flashes in my life. And I've really only had another one. And it was when the flash said that I should marry the woman that I continue to be married to. And it said that I should be a photographer. Now, I had planned on, getting out of high school and going to medical school. And you can imagine the havoc that created on my European parents, who were hoping for a doctor in the family, much like a Irish family hopes for a priest in theirs, Anyway, it was that afternoon that I was very fortunate to have met Ansel Adams. And the great thing about it was that we were able to sort of stay in touch. I got invited to a workshop. My mother had hooked it up for me, gave it to me for my birthday. And I went out there and I got off the thing and I met him in Yosemite Valley in front of the store there, the gallery. And he remembered immediately who I was, and I knew, that this was going to be my calling. And, the funny thing about it is, or interesting about it is, I guess, is that I've never turned back. I never looked back. I never felt like, God, I made a mistake here. I mean, there's been challenges, don't get me wrong. It's not always easy, as people who are also on this talk tonight I'm sure can attest, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything to this very day. And the ironic part of all this, which I love, is that my daughter starts medical school in August. So somebody in my family finally became a doctor. And so I guess my dad is probably looking down saying, yeah, there you go,
Finally.
Yeah, finally, after all this stuff. So
what a great story.
So anyway, I'm sorry. I that kind of was on top of my mind, but I was thinking again about that, the title, of your talk, your series. And I was thinking about how synergistic it was to, the work I get to do, because I've always sort of decided that if it stopped being happy, I mean, not that it's not work, but if I overall just stopped feeling happy, I think I would go find something else to do. I don't know what it would be, but I would just go find something else to do.
Well, hopefully you will never have to think that through.
Well, I'm pretty busy, so life is good.
Well, like I had said, go look at his website, because there is so much there. And, I tend to be a person that drills down because I'm more curious about people and their journey. How did they get here? How did they decide this is what they're going to do, and this is how they share their work?
Yeah.
And websites get me into the head of photographers. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I just find the stories fascinating. So
I think too, the best talks that I've ever been to, I've gone to, I'm sure you have too, to many artist presentations, back before Zoom was even a reality, but when we would go live to an auditorium and sit down and slides would flash on the screen kind of thing. And the thing I was always enthralled with was when the person speaking had some sense of how they got where they were, because the talks that I've heard in the past where I knew this and I met this person and I all that, where it's just a lot of patting themselves on the back, just kind of leaves me a little bit on the cold side, feeling like I didn't connect. I was unable to make a connection here. And anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry to keep going on this, but it was I like the happiness theme tonight. This is good.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're ready for you to start sharing your.
Why don't I do this? I'll just click this thing.
Your story, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do
just
that.
Like we practiced.
Yeah, just like we practiced.
I get to say I got to, tutor Craig on his technology. Here. So
thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God. I mean, if you hadn't tutored me, we probably wouldn't be doing this tonight.
I know, right?
All right. Well, anyway, so welcome to White Sands. This is actually the cover of the of the book that I did with the University of New Mexico Press. I apologize for every once in a while these sort of egregious little bits of advertising that you're going to have to put up with. I'm sorry. I guess what you sort of have to understand is that, you know, all of these things like books and the writing and this and that comes out of, in a sense, a single mind. And they're created that way. So to you know, they're not created in little compartments, but they're all interrelated, you know, that the book came by way of some other writing that I was doing. You know, I didn't start off the idea of doing this project and writing a book. In fact, it came because I finally, after I was about probably 50-60% of the way through making this work, I realized that I had something I needed to share with people. And then I'd heard about there were rumblings about the monument being turned into a national park, or becoming a national park, I should say. And that kind of led to me wanting to do the book. So anyway, bear with me here when I do this. I do it not to offend, but to share my sheer, there's a piece of me that's incredibly astonished that someone would want to publish a book of my words and my pictures. I'm always humbled when this happens to me. And it never seems to go away. And I've published 10 books now. And I'm always just sort of astonished when the publisher says, Craig, I think we'd like to publish that. I think it's amazing. I really do. Anyway, I thought I'd start here. I thought this would be kind of a fun thing to show y'all. Just because I didn't think much at the time when my father took this photograph. This was taken in Canada with what would be the second camera that I had. It happens to be a Diana, one of those little gray plastic cameras that cost in 1965 probably cost about $3.50. But they work well. I like to show this picture because it's funny. When I met Ants Labs that day, I was wearing a coat pretty much like this one. But the thing I wanted to point out here is you'll notice around the toggle is a rabbit's foot. And I have to confess, I don't carry a rabbit's foot with me anymore. But at the time, it was appropriate, I guess. And it reminds me that so much of what happens in photography is that is driven or maybe not driven, but controlled perhaps by a certain amount of luck. And while I do agree with what Pastor said about chance favoring the prepared mind, I still think there's a whole part of this thing that we're just not in control of. And so that's why I like to look at this picture, because it reminds me of that, that luck plays a huge part of the work that we get to create, and the thing about it is that, when you're out making a photograph of a beautiful, resplendent, sublime landscape, oftentimes there's only one moment to get that picture, and then the light goes away. I mean, maybe many of you remember the story of Ants Labs' moonrise photograph, where he just very luckily, happened to fire that shutter off right before he lost the light. I have encountered that situation dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times in my own work. Don't you love this? This is called a tableau. It actually was painted by a religious saint maker. Not that I'm a saint, certainly, but his name is Charlie Carrillo, and he painted it for me as a gift. This is my first real camera, the camera that I bought when I moved to the United States. It was a Yashica 124G, and it looked just like this one here. And while those are not my hands, that looks like my camera. So I thought I would show it just so you can sort of see that there's been a process here, and that I learned something from every camera, every photo that I've taken. This right here is my view camera, which I still use. I make a lot of digital pictures now, but I've not abandoned film. I think it's a wonderful medium to work in. But then I thought I should at least show you this too. And I want to talk a little bit, not too much, but a little bit about gear, because everybody asks, I've done this, I've done so many talks over the years, and invariably somebody puts up their hand and says, well, Craig, that all sounds good, and we love your pictures, but like, what kind of gear do you use? Hoping that I'll have some secret, to all of this by my gear choices, and I have shot with Nikon probably since 1973, 74. And I'm fortunate to have used other cameras. In our workshop program at Eloquent Light, I look at pictures taken with Sonys and Ricos and Pentaxes and Canons and so on. And the thing that's absolutely remarkable about it to me is that they all make good pictures, In fact, I think you'd have to work really hard today to find one that doesn't, to find a camera that doesn't make good pictures. I think that what one of the things that happened when in using the view camera, is that view cameras are a little bit different in that, the photographer can choose a lens based upon the look that they're looking for. The lens that happens to be on the front of my view camera here is a lens that is over 100 years old. But I like the look, and so it's the one I happen to use. When you get to digital photography, there are not quite so many options anymore, and those lenses are so highly corrected that they sometimes, lose a lot of the personality that it could have, that the lens can bring to the photograph. And while it's true, digitally you can add, subtract, remove, change an image to whatever you want it to be. I long for those days when I could shoot with film and in the same way with a digital camera and have those kinds of choices, But I shoot with Nikon, and I shoot that with it because I can see the difference in those pictures. When I look at all my students' photographs, taken with Leicas and Sonys and so on and so forth, not that they're bad. I'm not saying that at all. They're gorgeous, but I like the look that a Nikon camera and lens brings to my work. And so this is the one that I use. This happens to be a D850. And there you go. So we go to White Sands, and you can kind of see, here we are at White Sands, and there's my Nikon camera on top of my tripod, and my backpack, yeah, photographing White Sands was an absolute joy for me. I think that what happens, at least what's happened for me, is that when I finally get caught up in a project, it's really akin, and maybe it's the same as falling in love. I fell in love with White Sands, and I think for a while maybe it fell in love with me. It showed me things, it taught me things. I mean, I'll tell you that one of the most astonishing things that happened to me at White Sands was I was walking up between two dunes that were about 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet tall. And I was walking along, and it was so quiet. The wind hadn't picked up. And as I was walking, I could hear my heartbeat. I could walk along and hear that. And I remember talking to a ranger about it, and she smiled. She said, "Yep." She said, "You had the White Sands experience, Anyway, it was astonishing to me. And the place, I saw other things too. It was, and you'll hear me talk about those as we go along here. I also print my own photographs. I thought I should show you that too a little bit, just to give you a little context. I use Canon printers. I've always printed my own work, whether it's wet printing in the traditional darkroom, or in this case printing right now digitally. The image here that you see is for my latest Native American work that I'm doing right now, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. I'm a big fan of Canon. That doesn't mean there's any, that somebody else is bad. It's just, I kind of weighed out the choices and decided this was, for me, was a great way to go. I've shown in museums here, and this is, an example of a traveling exhibition on Ghost Ranch, which was that famed place where painter George O'Keeffe lived. All of the prints that you're seeing on the walls here were made in the traditional darkroom, the wet darkroom. And then many of them were made, in fact, all the pictures were made with the camera that you see in that glass that glass case there. So I also write books. I was talking a little bit about that. This happens to be my newest book. It's called The Light of Days Gone By. And it came about because we were in the middle of COVID and I'd started doing some writing, and my business partner had decided to do some writing. And so we decided to create this book, and it has been incredibly well received. And it's kind of a retrospective. It seemed like since I had the time on my hands, it was worth spending some time considering my life as a photographer. I've been doing this now for 40 years, 43 now, I guess. And I decided that it was time to sort of think about what it all means, just so that I don't have any answers to that question yet, like what it all means, but I'm getting a glimpse into how it formed who I am and how it has provided challenges and satisfactions and so on to my life. And as you heard me say at the beginning of this, I'm tremendously grateful for those opportunities. And so, of course, today we're going to talk a little bit about Into the Great White Sands. And this was a little created thing for my publisher. When you walk across the dunes, not only do you see bird tracks, but you also see the tracks of people as well. And I'm going to show you some other tracks in just a little bit. I should probably also tell you that I have a website. Linda was telling me yesterday how important it was to have a website. Well, I wanted you to know I did. This is what the landing page looks like. It's craigvarjabedian.com. Please come on by and see it. There's lots of stuff there. You don't have to stay for the whole show, so to speak. There's a lot to look at, though. You can go and sign up for the newsletter, and you can look at current projects. You can look at all the books I've written. You can look at the news. I mean, there's plenty to see here. So come on by if you have a chance. But today we're going to go to White Sands. White Sands is this amazing place of 275 miles of gleaming white sand. And I love this old postcard. It's from the 1940s. It was right when America was, starting to travel, after World War II. It's also the beginning, by the way, I just learned the other day, was also when U-Haul was founded, because there was a need for all these GIs to move their stuff. And so the company came along and they bought up all these old World War II trailers, government surplus, and they created a business which is thriving to this very day. I like to show this image because I think it's really cool. This is the opening day at White Sands in 1934. And I've been to this very place too at the park, but I love all those people sitting there, standing there, The picture, interestingly, I talked about this with the Park Service, because I did a bunch of restoration on this for them, was taken with what is called a circuit camera by a photographer in Silver City, New Mexico, who went out there for the opening. And the way this camera works, it works a little bit like a clock, in that what he did was that he pegged the left-hand side of the picture, and then he pegged the right-hand side of the picture, and then he went ahead and he put the camera over to the left. And what happened was the camera panned. And as the camera panned, the film would slide past a slit in the back of it, and it would record, all what you see here. And actually, if you take a look at the bottom left, you can actually see the shadow of the photographer and his camera. Anyway, I love this image. I love looking at it. I can't do it for you here, but I love blowing it up and looking at people's faces, looking at the children. People are so proud of this, the people that are a part of this picture today. And I love the fact that probably in 1934, some of these people are still around, although I haven't met any, Anyway, so just to give you a little location, this is where White Sands is located. It's located in New Mexico. You all from Texas can see yourselves over here somewhere. To the north of us, of course, is Colorado, and to the west of us is Arizona. But anyway, that's where we're going. Oh, sorry. And this kind of gives you a little closer, view of it. There we go. So you can kind of see where the other national parks are here. You can see Carlsbad, which is the caverns in the southern part of New Mexico. Then you see white sands. And of course, this map was made in the 1930s, but I just thought it was so funky. I kind of wanted to include it. There are a whole bunch of other parks that have been put in here today, but these are the major ones. You can kind of see how far it is from Grand Canyon and Zion and so on. So there's a lot. If you come out here to the west, there's a lot to go. So I take you to White Sands to kind of give you, a little bird's eye view of where we're going to be. So first of all, the thing to notice is all of that big white area. That's actually the dunes themselves. Okay, and you can see how far north this sand really covers. Okay. The park itself is the lower part of this image that kind of starts where that line is, where it says wind, that cooperative area boundary. Everything below that is basically that 275 square miles of park, and preserved wonderfully, amazingly, gratefully, for the American people and anybody else that wants to go see it. It's a I think it was Wallace Stegner who talked about, the parks being, the real jewel of America. And I think he's right. This place and all the others are just huge gifts to the American people from my point of view. But what you kind of need to notice here is that once you get past that cooperative area, basically you step into what is known as the White Sands Missile Range. And the White Sands Missile Range is an area where missiles are tested, and NASA does research, and General Electric and many other companies use the place to do all kinds of testing of things that fly and sometimes blow up. You can also kind of see from this that you can see the San Andres Mountains at the very top of that, and then of course you go on top of that, and it's still, you have even more of the missile range. If you go to the other side, to the bottom of the park, is you can kind of see it down there is the Holloman Air Force Base. So what you basically kind of see is you see a national park that is nestled in a rather unique place, not only geographically, but also kind of nestled into, between a missile range and an Air Force base. Let me keep going here. So I wanted to start here just a little bit at the missile range, because I think it's an interesting sort of thing to see. These are, this is their little museum, but all of these things at one point were launched or flew over White Sands. Interestingly, White Sands was created during World War II, when the Allies liberated the German rocket program and brought von Braun in the dead of night to the United States and to Alamogordo, New Mexico, to continue his work on the V2 rocket program. And if you visit the museum there, you can actually see one of the V2 rockets kind of, cut apart so you can see the insides of it. It's a pretty cool thing. This right here actually is the actual launch gate for the V2. It's still standing, and this is what it was built for. So out on the lake bed, out on the missile range, is this black line that you see here, and other than it, you can see kind of how stark this area is. The thing that's really interesting about this is it was built as an alternative runway for the Space Shuttle Challenger, and as a matter of fact, it landed here one time, and then was taken up by a 747 and flown back to Edwards Air Force Base. NASA decided never to use this again because their space shuttle was so incredibly dirty after they landed here that they never wanted to use it again, because it took them months and months and months and months to clean all the dust out of the controls and so on. So this is the remains. You can kind of see the edge of the runway and the countdown lights and even the reflectors that if they landed at night, that they would see coming down. Out on the missile range also, the remains, Native American remains of these wonderful old paintings that are pristine. And part of it is the fact that I think they're pristine because people can't get to them. I had to go in with an escort and everything else to see all of this. But the average person, unless you know your congressman real well, it's very difficult to get on here today. And of course, you have to work around, their schedule because they're always, detonating things over there. So you have to be careful. Perhaps the best known thing, and I say that not with any great, care, I guess, is the fact that that the first atomic bomb was blown up there in Caño del Muerto, which is part of the White Sands Missile Range. And this is where Robert Oppenheimer tested the first atomic blast. And this is what's called the Trinity site. And they launched the first bomb July 16th, 1945. So we're coming right up on it. What's really interesting is that you can stand here and you can actually see the pylons still from when that bomb, the thing that held the bomb up in the air, the tower, and was basically mostly vaporized when it went off. I have mixed feelings about this, as I'm sure many of you do. I'm not trying to defend it. It is an eerie place, and I've been here 3-4 times to photograph it, and I always feel, a little unnerved when I'm there. I always feel like it's one of these places that I want to make my picture, and then move on. I don't particularly want to hang out here, Anyway, welcome to White Sands. I thought I should show you this because it's much more inviting, I think, than the missile range actually is. So 275 miles of this, can you imagine this white gypsum sand it's not like silica, so one of the nice things about this, for example, is that you almost have to work really hard to scratch a filter or a lens with it, because the gypsum is softer than silica is. So it typically doesn't scratch, an optical glass. Although I highly recommend you don't try. That's one of the gifts of using this. The other thing that's kind of bad about it is that like the space shuttle, almost every day when I would go out and photograph, I would have to vacuum my camera bags out and clean everything, because no matter how clean I started at the beginning of the day, everything was covered with dust. So white sand starts like this. These are gypsum crystals that are created by runoff from the mountains that ends up, drying and crystallizing, and eventually the wind comes along and breaks off these crystals, and they tumble, and they'll tumble for 35, 40 miles, and by the time they get to where you saw those white dunes, they have broken down into such small pieces that you have, gypsum white sand dunes. But this is where it starts. So there you go. So you can kind of see out in the upper corner there, up around Lake Lucero, is where this process all begins. The water runs down. You can see it right there at the top where it says Wasser. Running down the mountains brings the selenium with it. And it lands and it dries and it crystallizes at Lake Lucero. And then the wind carries it and eventually, becomes the white sand that you see that covers this whole landscape. This is probably the first picture I made at White Sands that I was just incredibly proud of. It was made with film. And I like to show it because I still love it to this day. But it also speaks about how in the vastness of this place, how incredibly easy it is to get lost. I took this picture before I had access to, a GPS device. And so I was following the light and chasing around, and I made this picture. And then I realized that the sun was going down, and I didn't know how I got to where I was. And so my assistant and I, finally, we climbed to a high point, and thank God we hadn't gone that far. But there was a sense of dread that I had, before we found our way back to, the truck. Thank God we found our way back to the truck. There have been horror stories at White Sands about people that didn't find their way back to their truck and unfortunately perished out there on the dunes. It's an awful thing. If you stay in sort of the tourist places where you see tons of people, you will certainly won't have a problem. But if you hike out on the dunes, it's like lots of water and a GPS device are critical to, sort of ensuring your safety. So here we are. Good morning from White Sands. I never knew, in all the years I went out there, I never knew what to expect. I certainly did not expect. I did not expect a particular scene. In other words, I couldn't predict if I went out on a certain day at a certain time, I would come back with something that I could expect. This picture just happened, early one morning when I went out there, and it had been pouring rain all night, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to look. So I hiked out in the dunes and it was gray and this and that. Then all of a sudden this broke. So it was worth hiking out for sure. Okay. So one of the things that's really abundant at White Sands that it's this amazing, for me, it's this amazing almost collaboration, if you will, between, the dunes themselves and the sky. The dunes and the sky. Because, you're starting with it with an almost monochromatic, surface, the dunes. And then, nature comes along and paints these incredible sunsets. And it's this collision between these two things, I think, that makes this place incredibly special. I remember talking to a woman, park ranger named Becky, and she used to tell me that, the thing she had learned after 14 years of working there was that White Sands could be, anything to anybody. That that everybody kind of comes and finds their own thing there. Like if you go to the Grand Canyon, you generally speaking go there to find, the big canyon. And if you go to Yosemite, you go there, to see El Capitan and Half Dome and so on and so forth. White Sands doesn't have a big a big geologic feature like that. And so because the place exists quietly and subtly, you're given time to sort of find your own way. And this gentleman, flying kites, I actually walked over and talked to him after I'd shot this. He told me that this is one of his favorite things to do. He lives nearby Las Cruces, New Mexico, and he comes over here anytime he can to simply fly a kite. I have to tell you, this picture is a little bit of a like cheat shot in that I was up on a dune photographing, and I turned around and I saw, these people that were perfectly dressed and perfectly, with colors, running down the dune side. And I kind of made my way over very slowly, and I found out that they were shooting a commercial for a 360-degree camera that Samsung had come out with. And so these were the models that they were putting in their shoot. And I just happened to photograph them running down the hill. But I like the way it came out. So there you go. So here we are at White Sands. This is the actually the visitor center. It was built as a WPA project in the 1930s. And in the beginning, you would go into the park underneath that portal that you see there, where you can kind of see that little red sign and the yuccas that are blooming behind it. Well, that was a driveway at one point, and the ranger would be in that doorway there, taking your 15 cents to go into the monument. So these are the picnic tables at White Sands, and I think they look like UFO ships, unidentified flying objects. They're built uniquely and beautifully for the environment that they have to serve. That intense light, intense heat. With that scalloped covering on them. I happened to go there after a hellacious rainstorm the night before, and the picnic area had filled with water. And I was fortunate to be able to, sort of photograph the reflection of all of that out there. So the dunes, here we go. Welcome. This is the dune. This is a dune. This is called a Barkan dune. One of the things I learned about photographing at White Sands was that you couldn't go out there and really photograph on either like a totally overcast day or like at noon. because you need the shadows. I mean, this kind of makes sense, but it took me a while to figure it out. You kind of need the shadows to be able to sort of see, you know, the shapes of things and the distance between various things. And so imagine this picture for a moment, if you will, with the sun, you know, coming down at from like zenith, like at 12 noon. You wouldn't be able to tell its shape for sure. Also, so I would photograph early in the morning, you know, until about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then after about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The middle of the day, unless there was a storm coming through, was just not a good time to be out there making pictures. Also, just as a little FYI, in the summer, you definitely don't want to be out during the day. I mean, unless you're kind of a glutton for punishment, because I remember having to go out on the dunes one day in the middle of the summer, and it was 118 out on the dunes. And so I decided I was never going to do that again. It was just too hard on me physically. Anyway, so this is another dune late in the afternoon. I love this light though. I just love this light. It is absolutely gorgeous. And there's a place on the map called the Heart of the Dunes. And I think in this picture, I found it. This is actually, you know, this is the only kind of allowed, if you will, graffiti that goes on in the national park, because someone obviously went out there with their you know, the heel of their boot and drew this heart out on the dunes. And the great thing about it is that, you know, by the next morning, this was gone. The sand that you can kind of see whipped up in the background there, you know, comes along at night and just kind of scrubs the dunes clean. So this was gone, you know, within about 8 hours, or excuse me, about 12 hours. And the dunes make great shapes, you know. These sort of reticulated rivulets, you know, are to me just absolutely astonishing. And sometimes I photograph them abstractly, like I did here, and sometimes I photograph them in a larger context. And in some places, the dunes are lower, like you see here with this, you know, this sage and rosemary growing. And in fact, what you're also seeing here is you're seeing, you know, the new bloom of a yucca in the bottom right, and you're seeing old blooms, you know, open pods on the at the top of the hill. I was showing this to one of my former college students from years ago, and she said that she thought it was the eyelashes of the dune. Maybe her eye is below there. I think that's a nice way of looking at that. For me, landscape photography is a lot about waiting. It's a lot about being at the right place at the right time. But it's about waiting. Sometimes you would see, you know, a particularly good landform that you wanted to do, you know, you thought would, you know, was calling you to make a picture. And then it was kind of a matter of hoping and waiting for, you know, the rest of the piece of the light and the sky to kind of coalesce, you know, to come together to make the photograph. I originally started this project actually in black and white on film, because that had been my way of working previously. And one of the great things about digital photography, of course, is that it allowed me to easily bring color into my work. I didn't have to work with a photo lab and have film processed and so on and so forth. I could, you know, deal with it on my computer and adjust color the way that I wanted it to look. I think it was a very good decision, because I would have felt so bad sort of leaving the color on the sort of the cutting room floor, so to speak, you know, like just getting rid of it by switching these pictures to black and white. So we talked a little bit about the skies. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. To me, the sky is amazing there, and it provides this beautiful counterpoint to the land itself. And I love this relationship between the sky and because the other thing about it too is that it's a different sky every day. I've been back to this site probably 10 times, and I've never gotten the same picture each time. Sometimes I get nothing in the sky. You know, it's just sun comes up, that's it. This is taken about probably 15 minutes before the sun popped up. And other times this kind of thing happens. And other times there's no sun, you don't see the sun until, the end of the day because the things have clouded the sun out, But I feel this strong relationship, as I say, between the sky and the land. And so I incorporated it as often as I could because I thought it was just so powerful, What you're seeing down below are these pedestals that are created by sumac that started to grow on top of, or took root in the sand, and then the dune moved on. But the roots are basically holding the pedestal together. And one of the cool things about this too is there's an owl living in that one up front, which I really thought was cool. And I ran into him a couple of times going out there late in the day. And see, this picture was taken just, this is the beginning of sunset. Here you go. So now you see the sun slowly sinking into the west. And there's probably not a day that I have photographed down at White Sands where I didn't stay there to watch the sunset. I felt like it was my way of saying goodbye, and an opportunity to, to realize that how magnificent this was, and that I would have another opportunity again, the following day. And of course, sometimes, the night calls. And so I made pictures out on the dunes at night. That is taken in the fall. It's a cottonwood photograph, and you can see just a little hint of the Milky Way kind of rising up out of it. The light that you see in the distance is El Paso and Las Cruces.
I have a question that someone's asked, and I thought maybe it's a good time to interrupt.
Yeah.
How far do you typically hike out there to get away from people and the tracks on the dunes? That's a question from Jamie. I thought that was.
That's a great question.
Yes.
It depends upon time of year. So if you were to go down there, like during spring break, for instance, you would have to do some serious hiking because there's so many people that have landed on the park, and the kids are out running and this and that, and they are marking up the dunes by running and playing on them. Mm-hmm. If you were to go there in October or November, there are very few people there, and so you don't have to hike out quite as far. I was really fortunate. I want to come clean on this. I was really fortunate that I was befriended by the National Park Service to help me make a lot of these photographs. And I was able to get to places that, the average visitor could not get to because they took me out on ATVs, out to distant locations that I would never want to hike to because they're so far out. And I think there's a chance of either not getting back when they close up the park at night, or just simply getting hurt, and then I have to fend for myself. Sure. I hope I answered that.
I think so, but there's another one from her.
Yeah,
Jamie's got the questions. She's curious how much annual rainfall does this area receive to support the foliage that we're seeing? I don't have those actual numbers. I appreciate you asking it. I don't have it. I do know that there are long stretches where there is no rain down there. Geologically, what's really interesting about White Sands is that White Sands is built on a basin, and what it means is that the water, rain comes down. Of course, it goes into the sand and it falls. But unlike, my home here in Santa Fe, for example, where the water runs off and evaporates and this and that, what happens here is that the water falls to the very bottom of the basin, then it can't go any further. And then so it's hidden basically in the sand. And so oh, come on. Well, anyway, I'm having a moment here. This foliage here, has to go down after it. Interesting also about the dunes is that there are times during the year where you can dig down a foot and come back, like half hour later, and the hole will be filled with water.
So again, it's all because that water's being held by the land itself. There's no way for it to run off. But I'm sorry, I don't know what the actual rainfall is. But it ain't a lot.
That's okay.
So next thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is yuccas and things that grow. The yuccas, of course, are probably what I would like to call like the star of the show, if you will. This happens to be a new growth yucca. You can sort of see what it looks like. This is probably, I would say, a week before it would bloom. And what is also really remarkable to me is that probably is no more than about 3-4 days of growth. That's how quickly it grew. Because once it starts, and when it blooms, it has the most beautiful fragrance. There you go. That's what they look like when they bloom. They also have this what's called verbena. The grass is called Indian rice grass, but the verbena is the pink flowers, and they smell like lilies. And I'd be out hiking and I would smell lilies, and I thought maybe I was being called home or something. But I eventually figured out that I was brushing up against these pink flowers, and then they would emit their gorgeous smell. Their gorgeous fragrance, just amazing. Anyway, this is that Indian rice grass. I love this stuff. To me, this picture reminds me of Japanese calligraphy. There you go. There's the yuccas. And the place just, the place is so dry, and then all of a sudden they get a little rain in the spring, and these in May, and these yuccas just take off, and they grow these amazing flowers. So of some interest that you may want to know is that picture of the two yuccas, that you saw in silhouette, that was taken later in the year. The yuccas on the left there, that's them from the opposite side. So you can sort of see what they look like when they're in bloom. And eventually the yuccas, make their way back to the ground, and then you've got the darkling beetles that come out, and they're looking for moisture. So eventually the blooms dry out, and they leave the seed pods, and then the plant dries out, and then the seeds disperse, and they go across the dunes. And what you can actually see in this photograph is a yucca that will eventually be covered by the dune. The dune is actually moving, will fall eventually on top of it. I haven't been down in a year, but I would bet you, that you could barely see that now from the time when I took this. And then everything gets kind of folded back into the sand again, and it breaks down and provides, nutrition for the next yuccas that will start growing. Also out on the dunes is like almost a line of, if you could see it from the air, a line of cottonwood trees. This happens to be that cottonwood tree that you saw that I did the night photograph of. It's taken later in the year, but they believe that there is a river that flows right below all of this that's providing water to this line of cottonwood trees. Yes, White Sands is a place for animal and people, which is absolutely true. I used to hope that, we would want to keep White Sands as this like pristine landscape, but I realized that everybody kind of played their part in all of this. Everybody was part of this landscape. And so I decided I would photograph all of it, This is probably the oldest animal that I photographed. Actually not the animal, but it's their track. This is a track from a mammoth that exists out on the dunes. And this is kind of an example of a place where the general public couldn't get to this. And the national park took me out there to photograph this. And you can kind of see what's happened here is that as the mammoth went down, it actually, put pressure and compacted the sand as it walked. And this is one of its tracks. And what you see around it is what happens with wind and water as it washed the sand away. But think about how old this is. I look at this picture, and I'm just kind of in awe of it, to be so close to something so old. Here we see this is a reproduction bowl, the original painted by the Mogollon people. That there's a shard sitting in the middle of it there, to give you an idea of what the shard would have looked like in its whole. This is considered membrace, by the way. This is really interesting. This is what's called a metate, and the early people would have ground corn or anything that they wanted to, wheat or whatever to cook with. And what's really interesting about this is that shortly after someone had used this, the dune had covered it, and eventually the dune retreated and revealed this relatively recently in geologic time. And so you can see it just looks like it's preserved, like these people just walked away and had left it there. And yes, the rock is red. I didn't paint it that color. So one of the things that's really wonderful to do is to go sliding down the dunes, and the kids absolutely love it. And I have to confess, I slid down the dunes once. I borrowed a saucer like that from the hotel I was staying at, and I took it down because I wanted to fully experience it, and it's a real rush. And if you ever go to White Sands, I highly recommend you do it at least once. Anyway, these two little kids happen to be cousins. I asked their parents if I could photograph them, and they were generous and said, sure. So I wanted to have one photograph in the book that showed people interacting with the place. Another nice thing about White Sands is that if you have, a pet, like a dog, you can on a lead, you can take your dog for a good long walk. And that's what my daughter's doing here, actually, with my two dogs. There she is. Soon to be a newly minted physician. My daughter actually came along so often when she was in college, when she could get a break. She went to the University of New Mexico, and I would try to schedule time with her, when she had time off, to come with me down on the dunes for a couple of days. Yes, there are camels down at White Sands. This gentleman who lives up in a place called High Rolls, which is about 20 miles out of Alamogordo, where White Sands is, happens to have two camels, and he takes them for walks there. You can also ride horses at White Sands. Don't you love it? One of the things that White Sands teaches you is that it ain't over till it's over, And I had already started putting my gear away, thinking that because the whole day I was photographing them, it was overcast, and the sun had already gone over the horizon. I was starting to pack it up, and all of a sudden the woman on the left shouted at me, "Craig!" And I turned around, and this is what I saw. And this is a handheld grab shot. But I was so lucky, and it just reminds me, to remember that it ain't over till it's over. So I learned that there's no way I could psych this out, I teach photography workshops down here. I get to do an egregious commercial here for you. I'll keep it brief. I love taking people out on the dunes to photograph. And these are folks that came from Massachusetts and from New York to join me out there. And you can kind of see how gorgeous the light is. they were so happy that they came back another time. That's how much they loved it out there.
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I let somebody in. I think you lost your spot.
That's okay. I fixed it. No problem. I call White Sands a place with a capital P, you know. And I show this one more time because, you know, this is the heart of the dunes. This is the heart of the dunes. And I'm so pleased that someone else noticed that and decided to mark it, because it's just always been kind of this place that you sort of knew was out there. And someone decided to leave a little mark on where the heart was. And I'm grateful for that. But it's a place with a capital P, you know. As I said, you know, the sky, this relationship between the sky and the land is so absolutely phenomenal here. You know, it just is.
Hang on. All right, Denise, I'm going to mute you. There you go. All right, Craig, try it now.
Okay. And so, you know, I'm always reminded with those old travel films that they would show at travel logs they would show in the theater, you know, as the sun slowly sinks into the west, as I look at these pictures, because that's how it felt standing there. I would just hear that in my mind over and over again. As you can see, or you may not be able to see, but you can, if you get up close, you can kind of see that the dunes, the yuccas on the right are blooming, and the one on the left is just beginning to bloom. I struggled for 5 years to make a photograph that I could use, you know, like a cover photograph. I began to realize I needed something that sort of summed up the place. And I was able to make this picture shortly before I had completed the project. Because there's no way I could handicap this, you know, to know to be somewhere at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a certain kind of day to get a picture like this, because I've been back to the site, you know, probably 12 times. I had been to this site, I should say, at least 12 times, and never got a shot that looked like this. As I said, you know, the Air Force Base is nearby, and they have a distinct presence there. I love the efflorescence of the contrail as it flies across the sky. I felt like I should salute when I took this picture. It felt very, very humbling, you know, to be living in America. So I like to talk a little bit about this for just a moment, because life comes along, and I had things I had to do with my daughter and house and my business and this and that. And I didn't have a chance to really, I'd like to say thank you. I think thank you is such an important part of life. I think gratitude is a very important part of life, and expressing it is to my practice is really critical. I actually learned that Native Americans have a process of thanking, you know, the land for what it gives them. And I wanted to thank the land for, you know, this place. I wanted to thank White Sands for what it had given me. And I just didn't have an opportunity before my press deadline. And I went back after the book was published. I took the book down there so I could show it to the place. And I sitting out on a dune looking at the book, and I had my camera with me. And at the end of the day, the place gave me this. And so I'm just tremendously grateful that I got this very real sense that there was a kind of a palpable, sentient existence there that had guided me in this process. And I'm just grateful beyond words for the opportunity to make these pictures. The close of the day. So oftentimes when I've done talks on White Sands, which I'll be doing in a couple of weeks, actually, people often ask, so what do you know, what's next? You know, there used to be an old commercial about, you know, what's next, and people would say Disneyland, but that's not going to be the case for me. I started by telling you a little bit about my Native American work. I had shot portraits when I worked commercially, mostly just, trying to make people look good. But I started making portraits of people that hopefully have a deeper sense about them. And I photographed a Native American man out on a hillside one time, and I was just astonished at how it came out. And so that led me to continue a little bit further. And what's been so amazingly to me, and what's been so generous on their part, is the Native Americans I photographed have not only shared with me their story, but have allowed me into their lives to photograph them. This is what you're looking at here is not costume, in the sense that these people dress up to make this picture. This regalia, which is the proper way to sort of talk about this, is part of the lives that these folks lead. They dance to celebrate their lives and the gifts that they've been given. These Native Americans people come from all over. Thank you so much. I appreciate having the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my story and my journey, and I hope you've enjoyed it. This has been a whole lot of fun for me. I often get asked about, people wanting to acquire a copy of my White Sands book. This is the information you need to know. You can get it on my website. And my assistant put up a discount code called Happy 15 in honor of Linda. And that'll let you save a little bit of money. I like that. I like to save money. I imagine you all do too. It'll help pay for my next adventure, So thank you very, very much. I'm tremendously grateful to have had an opportunity to do this.
This is really interesting. White Sands is just over the border, guys, especially for us in Texas. It's not that far. And one of the things that always catches me, one of my friends is in here, I believe Rob is in here. He went to New Mexico, I don't know, maybe it's 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. And the beautiful light that he caught. And every time I see one of those pictures from White Sands, it just reminds me of, I should really go back. And I can remember going one time, it was just one of those places that we stopped for 15 minutes and took a few selfies and moved on. And I didn't go there as a photographer. And the comments that I'm seeing jump through the chat line, we all need to go back and spend some time there. And so your images are beautiful. And I knew that they'd be stunning.
Aren't you the best?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was like, do I want to go back there? And I think that I might. So I don't know. There's just something magical about that white sand. I can remember being there and thinking, where did all this come from? It's just beautiful.
There is a sense of awe when you're there. You're just like, oh my God, you know?
And I could feel that again in these images.
Well, thanks.
I appreciate you coming on, and I want to thank you for taking the time to do this, because I know that you do quite a few presentations, but each one you do, it takes time to put these together and make it fit for your audience that's in front of you tonight. So thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Did you have any questions that you wanted me to
I went through, I didn't see any questions other than the ones that I interrupted you with earlier. And I think we're good on questions. If you guys have any, most of them are comments, Craig, that I will share with you.
Right, we'll talk later.
Yeah, no, I'll share those with you through the entire text, because sometimes those are fun for the speakers to see how people are reacting to their images. And
someone asked here, how abundant is wildlife?
There you go.
And someone asked about shooting too. Well, let's see if I can do both of these. So a wildlife is abundant. They released, years ago, they released oryx out there on the missile range, and they have learned to jump the fence, and they've ended up coming on to the park where they have to be removed because they do a lot of damage. But there's also kit foxes, and there are, all kinds of, there are owls there. I mean, there's just tons of smaller, also another interesting thing too is that there is wildlife there that has so amazingly and wonderfully adapted to the landscape that genetically they started off, having hair, the color, say, of yours, Linda. And by just living out on those dunes for so many years and so many generations, they turned white, as a way of adapting. They became like my beard, right? It's really a remarkable thing. And one last thing I was going to say too is they've actually found species out there that don't exist anywhere else.
Well, that's crazy.
At White Sands, and they're still finding stuff. I mean, they recently found, for example, prehistoric camel tracks out going across the dunes. I mean, that's how magical it is. There was another question about my process of shooting.
Yeah. So
what was that question?
Let me read the whole thing to you, because Alden is a portrait photographer. So his question was, what was your process shooting the portraits? And then he wants to know, how did you connect with the Native Americans that you photographed?
My process of shooting is really, really very, very simple. In that I, in fact, all of my photography is very, very simple. I know there are people who can make things, really complex, when they photograph, and I'm kind of a big believer in teach their own, but in my case, most of the photographs that you saw were, save a couple, were natural light. So they came in from a north facing window, and a little bit of reflected light was put back into the shadows to kind of open them up a little bit. I spent a lot of time getting to know the people I'm photographing first. I want them to feel really comfortable when they are talking to me. So we'll sit down and we'll chat and we'll share stories. Hopefully we'll laugh a little bit, and, we'll have some thing in common, I just ran over, I got a flat tire coming here kind of stuff, or, my family got together on Sunday and we had a big meal, or whatever it is, that we find that there is more about us that is the same than there is that is different, even though it is different. I mean, I don't live a Native American life, but they don't live my life either. So, we find a place in the middle of all of that to realize that we can do something really beautiful here, and we do something that celebrates who they are. So that's the process. That's the process.
All right, that's wonderful. All right, Craig, thank you so much for taking us on this journey with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It was just
Linda.
wonderful to have you. Guys, you can connect with Craig at craigvarjabedian.com. Look for him on Instagram at Craig _ Varjabedian _
photo.
Is it photo
There
or
it is.
photos?
Just photo.
And I'm going to link all of that in the show notes so that you'll get the right spelling and everything. So next week, David Cutts will be here to present Creating a Backyard for Bird Photography. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.